Paul McCartney has spent decades reflecting on the turbulent period that marked the end of the Beatles, a time filled with creative brilliance, personal tension, and a feud that would define the band's final years. While the public often paints the Beatles as four inseparable friends whose music shaped generations, Paul insists that reality was far messier, full of disagreements, misunderstandings, and egos clashing in ways that none of them could have predicted. Central to much of the tension was Yoko Ono, whose presence in the studio became a lightning rod for conflict, particularly with Paul, though he admits now that history has often simplified or exaggerated the story. Paul recalls how in the late 1960s, the band was stretched to its limits. Constant touring, recording, and experimentation left each member emotionally raw, and when Yoko began accompanying John Lennon in the studio, she became an easy target for the others' frustrations. At first, Paul viewed her with skepticism, concerned about how her proximity might disrupt the band's delicate dynamic, but over time, that skepticism turned into misunderstanding, which spiraled into open conflict. The narrative that Paul hated Yoko is only partially true, he says. He simply struggled with how her presence highlighted unresolved tensions within the band, tensions that had been building for years. The Beatles were no longer just four musicians making music, they were corporate entities, creative rivals, and family members all at once. Money, management decisions, personal relationships, and artistic differences collided violently. Paul remembers sitting in recording sessions where a minor disagreement could quickly escalate into hours of silence or bitter arguments, and Yoko's insistence on being present and vocal about her thoughts, something John deeply valued, often made those disputes more visible, more immediate. Paul was frustrated not just by Yoko, but by the emotional chasm forming between him and John, a friend he had known since adolescence, a bandmate with whom he had shared everything from songwriting triumphs to personal heartbreaks. He has confessed that he sometimes acted defensively, misreading intentions, taking the presence of Yoko personally when much of it had nothing to do with him. The feud, he says, was less about Yoko as a person and more about what she represented: change, the breaking of old routines, and the exposure of fissures within the group that had long been ignored. Paul recalls the writing of the White Album and the recording of Let It Be as turning points. In those sessions, tensions were palpable. Arguments about which songs to include, how to record them, and even the order in which instruments should be played became symbolic of larger disagreements. Paul felt that John's growing attachment to Yoko and her influence over his artistic decisions created divisions that were impossible to bridge. At times, he admits, he reacted with stubbornness, holding on to old habits and alliances within the band, hoping that the music could serve as neutral ground. But as anyone familiar with creative partnerships knows, music can only carry so much emotional weight. Paul's reflections reveal a man torn between loyalty to his band, love for his friend, and the challenge of accepting that life, and art, were evolving in ways he could not control. He remembers heated debates over the band's business decisions, disagreements about management under Alan Klein, and the growing sense that their once collaborative process was now a battleground. Yoko's presence became shorthand for many of these struggles, though Paul has emphasized that she never intended to sabotage the Beatles. The world has often simplified the story into a caricature of Paul versus Yoko, but the truth is far more complicated, involving four individuals grappling with fame, personal growth, and the pressures of creating timeless music while living under a microscope. Paul recalls moments of real pain, like the first time he realized that John was seriously considering leaving the band. He remembers the mixture of betrayal, confusion, and heartbreak he felt, not only at the thought of losing a creative partner but at the prospect of losing the emotional anchor that John represented. Paul has described late-night conversations where he tried to reason with John, appeals made not just as bandmates but as lifelong friends. Some of these conversations ended in tears, others in silence, but they all revealed the deep emotional stakes involved. He has admitted that part of the tension came from fear, the fear that the Beatles could not survive without each member fully committed, and fear that once the group fractured, nothing would ever be the same again. The arguments with Yoko, he says, were emblematic of this larger fear. She was, in a sense, a mirror, reflecting the changes happening in John, in the band, and in Paul himself. In hindsight, Paul recognizes that his resentment often overshadowed empathy, and he has expressed regret for not approaching the situation with more patience and understanding. He has reflected on how the media amplified conflicts, turning internal disagreements into sensational headlines that painted Yoko as a villain and him as a martyr. Paul's memories are filled with contradictions, moments of anger and frustration interlaced with gratitude for the creative heights they reached together. He has admitted that some of the best songs were written amid these conflicts, that tension sometimes fueled inspiration, and that the presence of Yoko, challenging as it was, pushed the band to confront uncomfortable truths. He remembers writing songs like Hey Jude and Let It Be with a mix of exhaustion and determination, channeling personal and professional struggles into melodies that would resonate worldwide. Yet even amidst the music, the shadow of the feud lingered. Paul has spoken about the difficulty of reconciling love and loyalty with ambition and pride. He has recounted incidents where arguments over lyrics or arrangements spilled into personal territory, moments when the lines between friendship, artistic collaboration, and family blurred beyond recognition. The Beatles, he has said, were never a perfect unit. They were four strong personalities constantly negotiating, resisting, and challenging one another. In this context, Yoko's influence was significant but not singular. Paul has acknowledged that John's choices, the band's management decisions, and even his own actions all contributed to the tensions that ultimately led to the split. Still, Yoko became the most visible face of change, and the friction that she represented could not be ignored. Paul has reflected that this period taught him important lessons about communication, compromise, and the fragility of relationships, both personal and professional. He has spoken candidly about the guilt and regret he felt after the Beatles officially disbanded, knowing that words left unsaid and moments misunderstood would never be reclaimed. He has admitted that reconciling with the past, especially the role of Yoko, required decades of reflection. Paul has come to understand that their split was inevitable, that growing apart was part of human evolution, and that the feud, though painful, helped him clarify his own priorities, relationships, and creative path. He has described reaching a point of peace, where he could honor the achievements of the band while acknowledging the conflicts that shaped them. Yoko, he now says, is no longer an enemy but a person who influenced history, someone whose presence was a catalyst for change, even if it was misunderstood at the time. Paul recalls reunion attempts and collaborations with former bandmates, moments where he and John, before John's death, tried to find common ground, often mediated by music itself. The lessons from those interactions, he believes, informed his later work with Wings and his solo career, teaching him to navigate fame, collaboration, and personal relationships with more awareness. He reflects on the media's role in amplifying stories, recognizing that public perception rarely captures the nuance of human experience. Paul has emphasized that the Beatles' story cannot be reduced to a feud, a scandal, or a simplified narrative of love and hate. Instead, it is a story of four people navigating unprecedented success while growing into themselves, with all the mistakes, misunderstandings, and reconciliations that come with that process. His reflections now carry a tone of forgiveness, tempered by realism. He has spoken about honoring John, George, and Ringo, recognizing their contributions and their humanity, while also acknowledging his own flaws. Paul credits Yoko, in a strange way, for forcing him to confront the inevitable. Change is constant, relationships are complex, and even the most brilliant collaborations cannot escape the realities of time and circumstance. He has said that this understanding helped him approach later collaborations with respect, empathy, and a clearer sense of purpose. Today, Paul looks back on the Beatles' breakup with a mix of nostalgia, sadness, and gratitude. He recognizes that the feud, though painful, was part of a larger journey that shaped not only his career but his understanding of love, friendship, and artistic integrity. He has expressed that music remains a bridge, a way to reconcile with the past, communicate with fans, and honor the relationships that defined his life. Paul's reflections offer a candid glimpse into the emotional complexity behind one of the most famous splits in music history. They reveal a man who has wrestled with resentment, regret, and misunderstanding, yet who has also found forgiveness, insight, and perspective. The feud with Yoko Ono, once a source of conflict and tension, is now seen as a chapter in a broader story of human growth, artistic evolution, and the enduring power of music to both divide and unite. Paul's story reminds us that fame amplifies both triumph and failure, that legends are flawed humans, and that even amidst creative genius, personal relationships remain delicate, challenging, and profoundly influential. His journey through conflict, reconciliation, and reflection is emblematic of the larger narrative of the Beatles, a story of extraordinary talent, deep friendship, profound misunderstandings, and the lessons learned when four individuals confront their own limits, egos, and desires. The feud with Yoko Ono may have been just one element of that journey, but it remains a defining one, shaping Paul McCartney's perspective on collaboration, communication, and the fragile, complicated art of human connection. Through decades of reflection, interviews, and musical exploration, Paul has come to see the breakup of the Beatles not as a failure but as an inevitable evolution, one that allowed him to grow, to create, and to ultimately understand the intricate balance between friendship, love, and the pursuit of artistic truth. It is a story of grief, anger, growth, and acceptance, told through the lens of a man who lived it, survived it, and continues to share the lessons of that extraordinary journey with the world.